summarize what was decided in today's cabinet. Minister.
Thank you very much, Chief Secretary, and once again, welcome this afternoon. Today, I'm with the Minister in charge of Presidential Affairs, Honorable Joram Gumbo, on the far left, and then next to him is the Minister of Energy, Honorable Chasi, and next to me is Professor Mtuli, Minister of Finance, and I've got the Minister of Justice on the other side, Honorable Ziambe. The government of Zimbabwe is intensifying interventions on recovery, rehabilitation, reconstruction, and resettlement in a bid to restore normalcy in Cyclone Idai affected areas. The traditional leaders have been given a green light by government to undertake the relocation exercise in the affected communities of Manicaland province. That is the update which we got from the Cyclone Idai disaster from Minister July Moyo, who is the chairperson of that interministerial committee. Government is still appealing for assistance from all well-wishers in the form of food and non-food items for all the affected households. Over 90% of the roads are now trafficable. Government, in collaboration with UNICEF and WHO, completed the immunization and nutrition catch-up campaign, including mass administration of measles, rubella, and human papillomavirus, cervical cancer, vaccination in Chimanimani. This was targeted at children between the age of 6 and 59 months, and girls between the ages of 10 and 14 years, respectively. We are concerned as government, indeed, over reports of regular occurrence of earth tremors in the Beacon Hill area in Chipinge. The Meteorological Services Department is thus to carry out an assessment to establish the causal factors behind the unprecedented movements of the huge rock boulders deposited at various points in the Ngangu area of Chimanimani district. Government also considered and approved principles for the amendment of the Competition Act as represented by the Minister of Industry and Commerce, Honorable Lovu. The principles seek to align the Act with the Zimbabwe Constitution. Key provisions of the principles include the following: empowering the Commission to levy administrative penalties for companies that violate the competition laws, introduction of a corporate lenience program so as to facilitate the successful investigation of cartels, strengthening the powers of the Commission in obtaining evidence during investigations through providing for the procedure to be followed, as well as the obligations to be imposed on its investigation officers. Also, it covers empowering the Commission to employ certain persons to assist with the entry and search where such services are required. It also provides for cooperation, coexistence of the Commission with sector regulators and other competition authorities. And last but not least, it also empowers the Commission to undertake the review of activities and legal frameworks of trade and professional associations to assure that they are consistent with competition legal framework. Cabinet also received a report on the second 100-day cycle is presented by the Minister of State for Presidential Affairs and monitoring implementation of government programs. The second 100-day commenced on 28 February and will end on 7th June 2019. It was reported that as at date 50, 14 projects, which is about 16%, were ahead of target. 54 projects, which is about 60%, were on target, while 22, which is 24%, were behind schedule. Ministers that had all their priority projects progressing well, either on target or ahead of target are as follows. Ministry of Environment, Tourism and Hospitality Industry, Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, Science and Technology Development, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, Ministry of Home Affairs and Cultural Heritage, Ministry of Industry and Commerce, Ministry of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs, Ministry of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services, and Ministry of Mines and Mining Development. Projects that were behind the target as at day 50 are as follows. The transformer, manufacturing and prepaid meter installation projects. That's one project which was behind. Then the project on setting up provision of surgical services at provincial hospitals, scaling up child adolescent mental health services, and customer care training for health personnel. That is under the Ministry of Health. Compliance with Private Voluntary Organizations, PVOs Act, by non-governmental organizations, capacity building for enhanced communication with persons who are hard of hearing, industrial harmony and sustainable livelihoods projects, that again was behind target. Makuti Chirundu optic fiber backbone link, that's another project which was behind target. Projects on security of tenure and mechanization of irrigation development, that's Ministry of Agriculture. The Cholocho disaster recovery, then Magama extension water reticulation project. Then another project which was behind is establishment of cultural and creative industry facilities, and then establishment of a recreational park at Nemama Growth Point. Another project which has to be finished still, refurbishment of Weza Country Club project, resuscitation of the girls' hostel at Roger Howman Training Center in Masvingo, provision of staff accommodation and ablution facilities at Machiloni Secondary School project, and dualization of the road from Melfort to Bromley along Harare-Mutare Road, dualization of the road from Tollgate to 59.4 kilometers PEG along the Harare-Bulawayo Road, as well as the Norton overrail and fencing of the Bait Bridge Bulawayo Road projects. Those projects that were behind target were impacted by price escalations, which rendered the initially allocated funds inadequate, as well as the shortage of foreign currency. Cabinet also considered and approved the principles on the proposed amendments to the Attorney General's Office Act 2011, Chapter 7.19, as presented by the Minister of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs. The Act is to be amended as follows. 1, to provide for the appointment of the deputies of the Attorney General. 2, to provide for the appointing of the Attorney General as the chairperson of the Attorney General's Office Board. 3, to provide that law officers and legal advisors in the different government ministries should fall under the administration of the Attorney General to ensure that there are no parallel legal officers in the government system. And finally, to provide the Attorney General's powers to regulate consultancy services and to render any legal services that directly relate to the Attorney General's office. Cabinet was also briefed by the Minister of Energy and Power Development on the fuel supply situation in the country. The Minister reported that they had started to register some modicum of stability, although much ground is still to be covered in bringing the situation to normalcy. On the electricity front, the Minister informed Cabinet that strategies would be implemented to cushion farmers and other critical economic entities from the ongoing drought-induced load shedding. That is as far as the fuel and energy supply is concerned. Then on the current price hikes, Cabinet notes with concern the continuing price increases, which are eroding the value of incomes for the workers and inflicting a lot of suffering among all our consumers. It is in this regard that Cabinet welcomes the passing of the Tripartite Negotiating Forum Bill by Parliament on the 23rd of May 2019. This vital piece of legislation is now set to be launched tomorrow by His Excellency Comrade E.D. Mnangagwa tomorrow morning. This, together with other measures already being pursued by government, will go a very long way in bringing stability to the issues of prices through broad stakeholder collaboration in turning around this economy. Furthermore, government will continue to strengthen and deepen the social safety nets so as to cushion consumers from the adverse effects of the ongoing austerity measures that are meant to reposition the economy on a sustainable path. I want to thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for such a succinct, presentation of Cabinet decisions. Now it is your turn, members of the media, to pose any questions to the presentation. As usual, I'll take 4 questions initially, then thereafter we will see at the second round. Any offers? Your name, although I know you, and
Thank you. My name is Takuzo Chiambakwe from Zim Papers TV. My first question goes to the Minister of Industry, if I'm not mistaken, regards the Competition Act. It's highlighted that it's going to deal with cartels, and we've been hearing a lot about cartels running Zimbabwe and not the government in power. I can see the smile, so I think you've heard about these cartels. What is being done now, in as much as the act is yet to be aligned to the Constitution? What is being done now to deal with these cartels? Then my second question goes to the Minister of Finance, Professor Mncube. It's been highlighted there that some of the 100-day projects failed to meet the targeted timelines because of budget. Prices were escalated because of what's happening in the economy right now. This goes back to the question I asked last week, and it was deferred to you in absentia, to say there has been a budget, the 2019 budget that you presented in Parliament last year, and 6 months into 2019, we now know we are no longer dealing with the US dollar, which you presented the budget in, but the RTGS dollar. In a wholesome, how is this budget still now relevant, given the changes that have happened with the switch from the US dollar to the RTGS dollar and the implementation of these projects? Thank you.
okay. Yes, please.
I hear the Minister of Commission was presenting the issue of projects that have been allocated under the 100-day program. And she only mentioned projects that have failed. And from the look of the projects, one would want to know the project that succeeded, the nature of the projects that one succeeded. So they will probably benchmark whether the excuse we are getting for foreign currency and price escalation would really match those that succeeded. What the nature of this project which succeeded, probably. 2 or 3. Is an example.
Okay. Yes, please.
I heard the minister talking about the issue of fuel, but I'm much more interested today when I was on my way to work, some people from contractors were telling me that their fuel stations are refusing to accept coins. I just wanted to find out from the government what's going on, and I get a clearance on the decision. And secondly, she also talked about the issue, the situation of fuel coming to normalize. To my observation, this is a bit contrary to what I've seen today. I also get maybe clearance. A clarification on what exactly is the why sector is different.
Okay. Any last this round? Person?
Yeah, we have more than
Okay,
four.
so
We do.
we go to back to the minister to coordinate the responses. Thanks.
Thank you very much once again. Thank you for all the questions. The first question was from Chambakwe, and this is directed to you, Minister of Industry and Commerce, Honorable Govu. And what you would like to know is what is being done about the issues of cartels.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, and thank you for the brilliant question. I have also heard about cartels. Generally, we have the Competition and Tariff Commission, which is an institution, a body charged with making sure that competition is promoted in our economy. And by nature, cartels operate covertly, which is why you'll find that in the principles we are coming up with recommendations or proposals to have a leniency program so that we can make use of players who are in the cartel to provide information. So ordinarily we might want to talk more of monopolies because cartels it's very difficult to break or identify them. That's why we are trying to further strengthen the capacity of the CTC. With regards to monopolies, which are a big problem in our economy, monopolies stifle innovation. You see what's happening in our economy, a few players who have huge influence who want to direct how the economy operates. So we are looking at the legal framework to that and also to strengthen the penalties that are chargeable by the Competition and Tariff Commission so that they are deterrent enough to try and dissuade those who would be. So the essence of the principles is to try and make sure that there is active and effective monitoring and enforcement of competition. So currently the CTC has done a study to assess certain sectors of our economy in terms of the monopolies, and these include the sugar sector, the food industry, the poultry, the dairy industry, and they have come up with recommendations in terms of how we can address issues of anti-competition which is manifested in those sectors. They are continuing to look at other sectors because my belief is that our economy over time has really tended to be controlled by very few people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question was it's directed to you, Minister of Finance. He said some of the projects failed to meet the target because of the changes in price. And he says, how is the budget relevant to what we have at the moment right now on the ground? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that question. Let me just add a footnote to what Mr. Ndlovu is in his response regarding monopolies and cartels, that one of the reasons why we really need to deal with the issue of monopolies and cartels is because they contribute to the price hikes that we see for some of the sectors. They are the reason, either acting on their own or acting with others in collusion, they lead to these price hikes, which tend to be unwarranted most of the time. And now we know, actually, if you look at the food sector, the real pass-through, so I'm using a technical word in economics, between the movement of the exchange rate and inflation is only about 3.4%. So it's not a full, 34%. It's not a full translation, 100% in terms of exchange rate movements, but it is lower than that. So we are aware of this, and we know that one of the ways for dealing with it is really to deal with the monopolies and just engender competition as one of the strategies. But I can come back to prices later. Let me deal with the question around the budget. Now, the budget is relevant. It's always relevant. If you recall, the budget is denominated in US dollars. So if you want to kind of think of a new budget as you think about what it is, just multiply whatever US dollar numbers you see there by the exchange rate in the interbank market. I repeat, in the interbank market. So this is what has panned out when we do that. When we do that, we're pleased to say that we're able to collect now more revenues, by the way. We expect to collect by year end 10 billion RTGS dollars in terms of the 2019 budget against an expenditure of about 12 billion. So both expenditure and revenues have gone up, and meaning that the gap is about 2 billion. It turns out that we are able to finance this gap in terms of our projections. In fact, this gap will be something like 4% of GDP because we expect a gross domestic product level by year end of the order of 70 billion RTGS dollars. So our numbers stack up, our ratios are in order, there's nothing to be concerned about. So really, but in terms of process, mid-year, end of July, I'll be presenting the usual mid-term review of the budget, and then at that moment, we'll have to obviously request Parliament for some condonation of certain expenditures, votes for different ministries for projects. So it is at that moment that we're able to deal with any needs for extra resources for these projects, those that have generally been impacted by the issue of resources. So the budget is in order. There's nothing to be concerned about. In fact, actually, it's even slightly better than we had projected when we approved it on the 29th of January. I've always said that currently we're in a positive situation, and we're able to deploy this surplus in social protection, in cushioning those who are vulnerable, in financing a certain infrastructure project. We're in a good position, at least on the fiscal front. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The next question was from Kolisane from Newsday, and he said we talked about those projects which couldn't meet the deadline. He would like to know those projects which succeeded. And we now do have the Minister of State for Presidential Affairs, who is in charge of monitoring implementation of our government programs. And I would like to hand over this question to you, Honorable Minister Gombo.
Thank you very much for that very long question, which requires a very long answer. There were 90 projects, all in all, during this cycle that you are talking about. And this report only covers, projects that, had been covered up to the 50 days of the 100 days. So as we speak right now, some of the projects might have been covered because the cutoff date where all the projects that were supposed to be covered during this cycle ends on the 7th of June, which will be by Friday, the 7th of June. So if the list is quite long. I don't know whether I should be able to go through it. It's quite voluminous. To give you the 24 projects, I've got them all. I can read which projects we have gone through and which ones have been completed, and by the 50 days. So maybe I didn't get the question.
No, you got it right, Minister. I think we can circulate the list rather than to issue.
Okay. So I will circulate the list for you.
Thank you very much, Minister Gombo. The last question on this one was from newszimbabwe.com, and this was on the fuel supply situation. He actually said he witnessed service stations who are refusing to accept coins. And he also said when you say the situation is beginning to normalize, that's not what he's seeing on the ground. It's different from normalizing. Honorable Chasi.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I think the position regarding fuel is that over the last few days we've experienced a modicum of relief for members of the public because a significant number of service stations were able to have fuel. And that is arising from the inclusive approach that government has taken to work together with the stakeholders in this particular area. We held a meeting last week. I think some of you were there, and were able to identify some of the misbehaviors that were happening in the sector. And we got a commitment from stakeholders that they were going to work amongst themselves and together with us as government to try and smoothen out those rough edges. Now coming to the direct question on coins, the law does give a limit regarding how much you can pay using coins for obvious reasons. It becomes very difficult to store, and depending on the quantum, it can be very heavy. I would have to check for you exactly whether there's been any change, but I think it was a maximum of $1,000. We still are expecting players in this field to conduct themselves in a professional manner. This refers to retailers and anybody else that is involved in the sector. So for me to answer the question specifically, one would need to know the amounts, but we've pleaded with players in the sector to be as helpful as possible to the public, and given our peculiar circumstances at the moment. Now, I'm not quite sure what you have seen when you've driven around, but I certainly have received testimonies from many people saying that the situation has somewhat improved. This does not mean that we have come to the end of the challenge. We still need to continue to work around the challenges we are facing. But the first port of call is ensuring that the players ensure that there are efficiencies in the system. People don't break the laws. They don't sell fuel either for export or for purposes of engaging in black market activities. But we are still seized with the matter, and we are continuously working on structures that will help to ensure that there is a certain and continuous supply of fuel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Chiefs.
Thank you very much. Now we come to the last round. I'll give at most 3. Let's start with you. Though normally we don't take rumors. I
was just
Okay. Thank you so much. My name is Leopold Munende. I'm with newzimbabwe.com. My question is concerning the cartels which the honorable ministers have been talking about. I'm sure you wouldn't want us to be alarmist, so we would really appreciate it if maybe you tell us what led government to using the word cartel, and if you have any names at the present moment whom you are investigating or whom you have already investigated and realized that they are controlling a number of cartels. And then I am also happy that Honorable Fortune Chasi and Honorable Kumbo are here at the same time. Honorable Fortune Chasi was asked last time about fuel which was paid for 24 months, which Honorable Gumbo had earlier on said during his tenure. He could not answer that question. So I would like one of them to answer on the fuel which was already paid for. Yamaitia government yakabhadhara for 24 months. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Maxwell Tapatapa. I would just want to ask the Minister of from Star FM. I would want to understand from the Minister of Finance. It looks like prices of goods are going up almost every hour. In fact, almost every minute, prices are going up. So I would want to understand, there's been issues that people are saying if the country doesn't want to adopt the US dollar, why not just remove the US dollar from the currency basket so that maybe the RTGS or any other maybe currency like rands will be prioritized? I just want to understand what's your take on that.
Okay, we're finished. Over to you, Minister. There's an anxious one. Now is the two of you repeating. I don't know. One of you has to withdraw. Who is withdraw? We need 4. Okay. You can, each one of you left. Yeah. We're giving you a discussion, but it's just something there was a promise that there will be an addition of the soccer by end of April. But it appears that now that edge hasn't arrived, and this is causing a lot of pressure at terminuses. And only that we made yesterday, that a lot of people are losing their valuables, that they try to split themselves in those few prices. That's making happy regarding the support services. Yeah, unfortunately, it was not discussed because we only deal with the issues that came to cabinet. We can't speculate over something which belongs to a minister who is not here.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
So I think by default we'll have your question, please.
All right, thank you. My question goes against the Minister of Industry. That tomorrow the President is launching a new bill. It's exciting to have him launch this bill. But if you look back, we've had conferences where the President has met with players in the sector, trying to foster a way forward to say, let's negotiate. You yourself, as the Minister of Industry, has met with different players in the sector to also try to understand where they're coming from and to find a way forward. So if negotiations have been happening all this time, how effective would this law be in curbing price increases going forward? Is it not just going to be another law which is not going to really bring forth results? Thank you.
Okay, so over to you, Minister.
Thank you very much. I can see today you've been very nice. There are more than 4, but that's all right. That's all right. The first question was from Farai Machwenyika, and that is on the 500,000 safety net for civil servants. I think that's what they said. It is you, Honorable Mutuli.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. This is not true. We have not set aside 500 million RTGS dollars to cushion the civil servants. We would have to enter first in a proper process, which we always do, before we reach any figure. But let me say this, that look, as government, we're always sensitive to the plight of civil servants, and whatever we can do from time to time, we'll do it within the means, within our coffers. But certainly we have not set aside $500 million as of now. That rumor is clearly incorrect and remains a rumor, and a wrong rumor as well. There was a follow-up question.
You wanted to tackle the next question, which is on prices of goods going up every minute.
Yes.
And the question was, if the country doesn't want to adopt the US dollar, why not take away, completely remove the US dollar from the market? That was a question from Maxwell Tapa.
Tapa.
Yes, Tapa. Yeah.
Michael Tapatapa's question. Thank you very much for that question. Well, we've received this kind of proposal before, and we continue to receive it. And this is also implied in your question, that if we're not US dollarizing, then perhaps we should be moving away from multi-currency regime with the US dollar removed, and then we stick to one currency, which will be considered a domestic unit of account. For now, we remain firmly in the multi-currency regime, absolutely, for the following reason, that if we were to move away from that in the way you suggest, then we need to be absolutely sure that our reserve position, the state of our foreign credit line that would support that kind of policy change, are adequate to support the policy change and not to cause even more volatility. So we have to be careful about that and not jump into it. This is why when it comes to dealing with price increases, we've adopted a multi-pronged strategy which involves basically bolstering our lines of credit, such as this $500 million that we sourced from abroad in order to increase the supply of foreign currency. We talked earlier about dealing with competition issues, for example, to make sure that other players can come into the market. If you look at, for example, the food sector, capacitating silo food industries to enter the market and be able to offer cheaper commodities. The issue about the tripartite negotiating forum as a platform and bedrock for launching a social contract so that we can all move together in tandem as we seek to reform the economy and shape the future for the country. That kind of social contract is enshrined in the TNF, and that will go a long way in stabilizing prices. We've also said that as government that really would like GMB to be the sole importer of grain. Then we're sure that perhaps the country is not being duped by clever business people. We're getting value for money in a way that allows us to keep prices within an even keel. The issue of social protection has been mentioned, where if we're not able to impact prices, at least we impact the negative effect of prices on ordinary and vulnerable citizens. So we've increased our social protection measures through, giving out food to those who need it. The unified cash transfer program is working well, but also the budget that we've set aside for BIM for those who cannot afford to go to school, especially the rural areas, being put on the BIM program in the usual way, and then also other vulnerable and elderly. So far, we have spent just over 16 million RTGS dollars in the last quarter just to deal with social protection as an agenda. And finally, we're determined to really keep fine-tuning and refining the interbank market so that it becomes more acceptable as the market through which foreign currency can be accessed and traded. So a multifaceted approach to dealing with this price issue is what we are on to at the moment. And the multi-currency regime remains in place. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I think you've actually tackled the last question, which was from Chambagwe. I think where he talked about this social contract, which will certainly help in stabilizing prices. So we are left with one question, which is directed to you, Minister of Industry and Commerce, which you wanted a little bit to talk more on these cartels.
Thank you so much. Why we call them cartels, and I think also any names being investigated. Look, it's apparent that there is a network that of companies, individuals colluding in especially price fixing, product supply, and while we are addressing this, the whole idea is not to target people to say we are investigating anyone. The best approach is to come up with measures that promote competition, that break these monopolies, and this is why we are trying to strengthen the institution that is providing oversight over that. So no one is being investigated specifically. We are looking at sectors, trying to identify the levels of competition in each sector and coming up with recommendations to improve competition, one of which has just been highlighted by Professor Ncube. On the issue of the TNF raised, I'll just add on to what Prof. Ncube has highlighted. First to say that for us as government, and taking a leaf really from the President, engagement remains a cardinal principle. So as we celebrate the TNF, it's yet an addition of a key stakeholder in the negotiation process, this time which is labor. It's very important that labor is included in the negotiations so that their issues concerning compensation for their work are addressed as we navigate through the current challenges that we are going through. So we have had significant progress when it comes to engagement. I'm quite sure you have had the private sector taking initiatives to peer monitor each other in terms of price movements. These are results of engagements that we continuously make with them, and they have taken on board the message, and they are at the forefront of also trying to make sure that the issues we discuss, they implement at private sector level. So we continue to encourage engagement, and which is why we believe the TNF will be very effective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Honorable Hovu. Now we are left with one question, which is directed to, I would imagine, to the Minister of Energy and Power. Although he actually said you're both here, so you can't. The issue which was said by the Minister of Energy that fuel was paid for 24 months. They just want clarity exactly what is the situation.
Supplies for service stations to dispense to the public. But I want to believe fuel that has been pumped up, but that has not been paid for. If I had fuel that lasts 2 years, I'll be the happiest person on the planet.
So that's it. On that note, we end our briefing, and we want to thank you very much, as usual, for coming and for being productive. And I want to thank